In this intro, we're going to start looking at some of the pathogenic DNA viruses. Now, this means the viruses themselves are going to have functional DNA. Any RNA that might be in them is not working. They're just basically going to have DNA as their genetic material. Now, altogether, with pathogenic DNA viruses, there are 7 families of DNA viruses that can affect humans. 6 of them we're going to cover. The one is rare enough that we're not going to discuss it. And they're organized into these 7 families based on their type of DNA, double-stranded versus single-stranded versus sometimes they've got a little bit of both, whether they have an envelope around the virus, their size, and also by what host cells that they attack in the body. Now, we're going to start with the double-stranded DNA, and there are 4 families of double-stranded DNA viruses. There is one family that has part double-stranded DNA in its reproduction and part single-stranded DNA. And then there is one family that has just single-stranded DNA, which is rare. Generally, DNA always comes double-stranded. And so we are going to start from the left and work our way to the right. But this intro, we're going to get through the pox viridae family, and we're going to get through the first 2 in the herpes viridae family. And so, starting with our pox viridae family, again, they're double-stranded DNA viruses, and size-wise, these are the largest of viruses. Viruses are small, but these are the largest viruses that infect humans. We can sometimes see these under a really good UV light microscope like we have upstairs. Again, usually viruses have to be looked at with an electron microscope, but some of these are large enough we can see them. Maybe not a lot of details, but we can see them. There's also a lot of animal pox viruses, which means these are viruses that did infect animals, but if humans come in contact with them, we can pick them up, such as monkeypox and cowpox and sheeppox. They're similar enough, our cells are similar enough to the animals that we can pick them up, and so they can get transmitted to humans. However, there are 2 pox viridae diseases, or 2 pox viridae diseases that affect humans, smallpox and moleskum contagiosum. So we're going to focus mostly on those. How we get infected by these viruses is through inhalation of the virus or close contact. These particular viruses can't survive very long on their own outside of a host, so it's close contact with infected individual. And all of these produce lesions on the body in 4 stages. The first stage, and I've kind of showing what's happening, the first stage, and this all happens within a couple weeks, are called macules, which means you have flat red spots. That's all that's happening. So within a few days after infections, you start to get red flat spots. Then it develops into papules. These now become raised sores. Then it develops into vesicles. Now you have these sores that are getting filled with a clear liquid. And then finally we get to the pustules. Now those vesicles, instead of just being filled with a clear liquid, they are being filled with pus. Hence the pustules. And it's at that stage, when they get to the pustules, that we call them pox. And so they get these very kind of large sticking out lesions filled with pus. Now the first virus that infects humans is the smallpox. It's also commonly known as variola, the virus itself, and it's also known as the orthopox virus, so several names, but the disease is called smallpox. This particular virus affects internal organs. It will still cause all those outward manifestations, all those same 4 stages, but it's really causing extreme damage to internal organ. And the symptoms then of having that damage to the internal organ is you're going to have an extreme fever. It is not uncommon of getting over 107 Fahrenheit, and causing that tired or malaise and delirium. If you're going to have a fever that high, definitely going to cause delirium. Now the virus moves throughout the body because it gets into the blood. Again, it can affect all those internal organs, but when it gets to the skin, it will show those outward manifestations of pox. For individuals that do survive smallpox, it will leave scars anywhere one of those pustules appeared. So lots and lots of scars everywhere. Now, luckily, if you're like, holy cow, another one we have to worry about, this particular virus we have completely eradicated from Earth. Yay! To the point that no one gets it anywhere in any part of the world, that we've actually stopped vaccinating individuals in the United States in the 1970s. So if you were born prior to 1972, you may actually have a scar. It's like a large scar for this particular vaccination. Now, so the only place that we can even find this particular virus, if you wanted to study it or look at it or take pictures of, we do have stock cultures of it in the CDC, because we want to have stock cultures of everything for studying. The only people, and some people are listening may be like, what, I got vaccinated? Well, depending on your age, and the only people that still get vaccinated for smallpox are those that are in the military. Only because this is an extremely deadly virus that, yes, if someone got their hand on it, it could turn into a bioweapon. And so anyone that's in the military still gets the smallpox virus, or the smallpox vaccine, and it does leave a scar. So if you know anyone that's in the military, they probably do actually have a scar on their arm from this particular vaccine. Now, another virus that's in the same little group is the molluscum contagiosum disease caused by the moleska pox virus. It is not as severe as smallpox, but it is still around. What it ends up causing, it is still a skin disease. It still goes through those characteristic stages of lesions, but really what it's mostly producing are kind of smooth, waxy, pink waxy looking, kind of shiny, waxy looking papules on the skin. Now, where these waxy papules show up is everywhere you itch. Now, the top places that apparently individuals itch, the face, the trunk, and the external genitalia. Take that as you will. Now, the individuals that are spreading this particular virus the most, children, because they're dirty and they scratch and they touch and everything else. Sexually active adolescents are spreading this virus because it can be spread through sexual transmissions, and AIDS patients seem to be those that are contracting this particular virus and showing these papules. Treatment, most individuals will heal on their own within a few months. However, if you have these big waxy papules all over your face, you probably don't want them on for a few months, and so they can freeze them off. But otherwise, most individuals will heal on their own. Now, other pox virus infections are usually ones that affect animals but can get transferred to humans if humans are in close contact with animals. We again call these zoonoses. Affects animals, but then it can affect humans. Examples: monkeypox, cowpox. Anytime you have contact with infected animals, it increases your risk of contamination. Still rare though. Not, if you're, petted one animal that was infected with a pox virus, doesn't mean right away you're going to get it, but it does increase your chance of contamination. And it usually causes a mild infection, so it's not going to generally be deadly. You usually get some pox, some of these raised bumps, and then some scars later. However, Edward Jenner did notice that milkmaids that were contracting cowpox actually became immune to getting smallpox. Cowpox and smallpox. So cowpox, yes, is a virus that infects cows, and milkmaids with their constant close contact with cows were picking up this mild infection. And then he realized that none of these milkmaids were actually getting smallpox. Cowpox and smallpox were close enough in structure that the immune system recognized the virus and could fight it off before it caused infection. So this was actually the first vaccine. Now, to test his theory, he had to, give someone cowpox, then give them smallpox, and figure out if it actually worked. And there were not a lot of willing subjects that were going to volunteer for that. And I can't even say he used himself, because, then he died and couldn't record his results. So, Father of the Year, he did this to his son. He gave his son cowpox, and then he gave his son smallpox, and his son luckily lived, but he is credited for developing the first vaccine. Now, monkeypox, again, virus that infects monkeys, but if you're in close contact with monkeys, I'm like, you could pick it up. Monkeypox is actually on the rise. Now, not that we're generally moving and hanging out with monkeys more often, but the thought was individuals, when everyone used to get vaccinated for smallpox, it actually made you immune to these other zoonotic pox viruses. And now that no one is getting vaccinated for smallpox anymore, some of these other animal pox viruses are starting to show up. Again, mild infections, but it is on the rise. Now, into our next family. It's the herpes viridae family, and it's a large family. There are lots of herpes viruses. They're still all double-stranded DNA. Um, and so I'm like, because there are so many, and because it's extremely prevalent DNA virus, I'm like, we'll go through these, because if someone asks you, have you ever had herpes before? There's 8 different strains of herpes that you may have picked up. And I'm like, you can't just be like, no, because you may have. I'll admit, I've had herpes before. And as we go through these, you'll be like, oh, yeah, maybe I have. Because there's so many different strains and so many different diseases that they can cause. Now, herpes viridae have linear double-stranded DNA. So double-stranded DNA found in lines. And again, lots of herpes viruses, high infection rate, most prevalent DNA virus found in humans. 90% of adults in the United States are affected by some strain of herpes viridae. Also, this particular virus, when it gets in the body, can go dormant, or what we call as latent, that it remains inactive inside of infected cells for years. And then sometime later, years later, this particular virus gets reactivated. Sometimes it's due to aging, sometimes due to some type of treatment like chemotherapy, sometimes it's physical or emotional distress, something, and all of a sudden this virus becomes active again, and it shows some of its outward manifestations, whether it's sores or whatever. Now, all of our herpes viruses are all named. The species name, we call it HHV for human herpes virus, and then they get a number. And then the number is just the order in which the virus was discovered, so nothing super exciting about the number. And so when you start hearing human herpes virus 1 or human herpes virus 2, because those are first two, it's just the number that they were in, the order in which they were discovered. And so we're going to get through 1 and 2. So human herpes 1 and 2 both cause slow spreading lesions. That's kind of their main thing. You're going to get lesions, they're slow, and I'm like, they can spread throughout the body. These particular viruses also used to be called the herpes simplex virus. Now we just call it the human herpes virus 1 and 2. Now, and I'm like, these two species, they are extremely similar. They're both slow spreading. They are 2 different viruses, and they affect 2 different regions of the body. The human herpes 1 virus generally affects above the waist. The human herpes virus 2 generally affects below the waist. Now, where the virus decides to show its manifestations, where it shows these skin lesions, depends on the type of infection you have with one of these viruses. Lots of options here. One, you could have oral herpes. This is when you're going to get cold sores. I don't have a picture of all of these. You get your basic cold sores. If you've ever had a cold sore, that's caused from a virus. It's the human herpes virus 1. Genital herpes is when you get genital sores, human herpes virus 2. Ocular herpes, again, you're going to have these sores or lesions around the eyes, human herpes 1. Whitlow, this is when you get these big, huge lesions on your hands. Now, this can become an issue because active lesions around your mouth, around your eyes, on your hands, and you're touching things with your hands all the time. Active lesions are a source of infection. Nursing or anyone in the healthcare, if you have active lesions like this, especially on the hand where you're touching things, need to be wearing gloves or you could be spreading this virus. It's called a whitlow. Neonatal just means that this is a particular virus that infants pick up during childbirth. So if the mom has this particular strain, infants can pick it up. Depending on the immune system of the baby, I'm like, it can be deadly. Rare that it happens, but it can be deadly if they're picked up during childbirth. And then herpes gladiatorum has a unique name in itself, but the lesions themselves, it is a human herpes 1 virus, but it can be found anywhere on the body. It just means you get lesions anywhere on the body, head to toe, and usually this particular virus is spread during wrestling. So a lot of times it's high school, adolescent wrestling. Again, if they've got skin-to-skin contact, and if there's open lesions somewhere, it can spread and cause more open lesions. And so this particular strain just has lesions anywhere. Now, the epidemiology, kind of how it's spreading, yes, is through those active lesions. That's the main source of infection. However, if you have the human herpes virus 2, asymptomatic carriers can still spread it through sex. So you may not know you have it, you may not have active lesions, but it can still spread. Really it's getting in from one open wound into another open wound, any type of crack, any type of cut. Once it gets in the body, it starts to affect cells. And so it starts to get inside of cells. The infected cells, when they reproduce, they will cause inflammation. The cells will eventually die, and they start to fuse to uninfected cells. So you almost start getting these big, huge fused cells. These big, huge fused cells are called a syncytia, or syncytium for singular. Now, this kind of being this big, huge infected cell, if you're a virus that's living inside of there, this helps you avoid getting targeted by the immune system of the host. So it's almost like its own little protective hole that it's made for itself. Now, the human herpes 1 virus infections, the top people that are spreading this particular virus are children. Yes, if you have open cold sores, don't be sharing chapstick, don't be kissing someone else that also doesn't have the virus. But children really are the top one that are spreading this particular virus. Again, they're dirty and they touch and they don't clean very often and they don't pay attention to very things. They say on an average 80% of children have picked up this particular virus. Now, the human herpes 2 infections, the top individuals that are spreading this particular virus are sexually active adolescents. It's normally those are the ones that are picking it up, they're spreading it, and this is when they're usually getting diagnosed. Now, to diagnose for one of these, they're usually going to look for the lesions that are reoccurring. That, you had a lesion and then it went away for a while and then it came back. That's characteristic of herpes because they can go latent and then come back. They can do a serological testing. They can look for the antigens of this particular virus. Treatments they can do. We do have several chemicals on the market. If you've seen any of these, heard advertisements for these limit the duration of the lesions. They don't make the virus go away, but they can make those lesions go away sooner. That just means there's less likely that you're going to transmit the virus to someone else if you don't have those lesions. So it doesn't cure it whatsoever, it just decreases how long you have the lesions. Your best bet is to not get it in the first place, if you haven't already. And I'm wearing gloves in the healthcare facility because you're going to have lots of skin-to-skin contact with patients. And if they have open wounds or you have open wounds, you could pick it up or you could give it to them. Also, sexual abstinence or monogamy with an uninfected partner. Condoms can limit the spread, but again, it just takes any open lesions that's exposed. So condoms aren't the most effective at stopping the spread of this particular virus. Now, we're going to stop there because I'm going to start with the human herpes 3, only because we get lots of debate and people have lots of questions on the human herpes 3 virus and it going dormant. It's the virus that causes chickenpox and shingles. Oops.